Welcome to Tales from the Waystone, a King Killer Chronicle reread podcast.
We are your hosts, Will and Phoenix. And let's get into it.
Welcome to Tales from the Waystone, Season 2, Episode 74, Nothing to See Here, where we will be looking at chapters 148 through 150 of The Wise Man's Fear through the lens of the elephant in the room.
We're so close to the end, but I'm going to continue doing this until it is no more. Mind you, we are going to continue the podcast. It's just the end of the book. Each week we'll be examining a section of The Wise Man's Fear through our chosen lens and figuring out what we can take from the text to apply to our real lives. We will also take some time to focus on a phronemus of the week and then share a recommended thing of the week, and finally wrap things up with 7 words from the book and 7 words from our own lives. Before we begin, let's get some disclaimers out of the way. First of all, we are in no way affiliated with Patrick Rothfuss or his publisher, Daw Books. And do I have to give you a spoiler warning? Also, a word to our community. Please be kind to yourselves, one another, and the creators of the worlds that we love exploring. All right, why did we choose the elephant in the room?
Because there's a lot of unspoken tension.
I don't like this.
Yeah, it's not great, Bob.
Yeah. My personality does not allow for this to feel terribly understandable, really, even. I don't deal well with hiding truths.
I think Kvothe's real struggle is with being vulnerable. Like, that is fundamentally the hardest thing for him in the world. And all of his struggles here are because he can't be honest about his past, about his experiences. And it's not that he lies about them, it's just that he can't bring himself to discuss them. He's always afraid of what someone might think. So let's go ahead and dive into this one. We start with chapter 148, Stories of Stones. So we pick up where we left off with Kvothe and Denna sharing a cart back from Tarbean.
Neither of them will talk about their parting in Severin. They make chit-chat and small talk and have just a myriad of silences that you could cut with a knife.
It's sort of like when you're on a road trip with someone that you have tension with.
I mean, that is what this is. It's literally a road trip with someone you have tension with.
And they can't just escape, right? There's no easy, okay, I'm going to leave you here in the middle of nowhere. So you kind of have to just grin and bear it. They're not willing to bring up how they left. Kvothe says it would be uncomfortable at best. Their argument that they had over the story of Lanray was unresolved when they left, and they both said some very harsh things to one another. They were not very kind. They, I think, were bringing a lot of their own baggage into things, and they were projecting a lot of their own past struggles onto one another, past experiences. And, those words can't be unsaid.
They can't be unsaid, but if you address them and do your best, it's kind of hard, but do your best to discuss them without emotionally charged language at one another.
I agree with you, and I think that's only going to be possible when Kvothe is able to actually talk about the root of where all of his fears and anxieties surrounding the Chandrian come from.
I don't disagree with you.
Like, Kvothe is this character who is yearning for safety and intimacy and vulnerability, to be able to be vulnerable. And when the opportunity presents itself, he just can't bring himself to allow it to happen. Like, I think this is something that would require more courage than any challenge he's faced thus far.
I agree with you. I do not have the type of personality that would hide these things from people once I'd formed a bond with them. And I form bonds, I think, a lot more readily than Kvothe can, at least as written.
Yeah, I would say if we were to bring attachment theory into it, Kvothe has a very insecure attachment style.
I'd say even like avoidant.
If we think about how he considers Denna, he is constantly of the belief that she can't possibly feel about him the way he feels about her.
And he won't ask.
Well, he won't ask because he's afraid of what he'll find out.
Right. He also won't assume.
Right. He refuses to look at the evidence in front of him, and he refuses to, put himself out there and be vulnerable. And then that manifests as avoidance.
Speaking of avoiding, they avoid conversation about Florian, although he is certain that Denna has to know, has to have heard his song, but he doesn't know that because he doesn't live in her head and because he hasn't asked her. Neither one of them brings it up. He's making assumptions. He might be right. I don't know that. It's frustrating. But in much the same way that like the Silence of Three Parts and all of like the stuff from the prelude and stuff from the epilogues and all of that, this is describing silences, thick, heavy silences all along their journey, like a silence that is tangible, right?
It's deep. It feels like there is a measurable weight in the air just hanging over everything.
And at the end of this section, before there's a little line break, he says, "We were trapped in the middle of one of those silences when we finally arrived in Imre." And he dropped her off at an inn and didn't even have the wherewithal to be charming and kiss her hand when he left and all of this flowery things that he would have liked to have done. And then, much as the way of most overthinkers, most people with anxiety, most people who review what they should have said, he can think of 10,000 things he could have said to her.
I don't think that is unique to just overthinkers. I think a lot of us have had that experience where you're in a situation, you say the dumb thing, and then you're just like, "Oh man, I had the perfect comeback loaded up and ready to go."
Right, but in this case, it's not so much about a comeback.
But just like, "Oh, this would have been the right thing to say in this situation."
It turns out, or it feels like to me, that Kvothe has made himself into the third wheel for Simon and Fella.
Yeah.
Like he has breakfast with them, he goes off to class, he's distracted, he loses his winning streak in the duels in Adept Sympathy. He apparently has set up his schedule so that it's not overloaded any longer. And so he goes back home, bathes, and gets ready to spend an entire day with Denna. And while he thinks about bringing his shade and even makes preparations for it to be shorter and more fashionable, he chooses not to because he didn't want Denna thinking of Felorian when I came to call. Now, what is your thought about why this seems so important to him that she not be reminded of the fey creature that has given Kvothe an extensive education in the sexual arts?
I think it may not necessarily be about her, but about him. It's like if you're getting ready to go out on a date, you don't necessarily put on your you don't exactly put on your ex's favorite cologne, you know?
Right.
And even if your ex had generally good taste and said, "Oh, this looks really cute on you, you should wear it," you're probably not necessarily wanting to be thinking about them when you're with someone else. And yeah, I can see maybe not wanting to bring that baggage along.
But do you think that Kvothe wears his shade on dates with other women?
Quite probably. I think Kvothe views Denna very differently from how he views other women. I think for Kvothe, everyone else is just somebody that he's met and is going to have a good time with. He's there for the moment. With Denna, I think he sees in her something different and wants something different. He wants a grand romance, not just a fun fling. He thinks about things a lot more and overthinks things a lot more when he's with her, just because he has attached so much weight to it. All of this is stuff that he projects. It's not like she hasn't had dalliances and romances all throughout their time together.
But he attributes all of that to her need to survive. He attributes every single one of those, what you call dalliances or romances, to essentially a job, and none of them meaning anything emotionally or like significant to her. But that's not necessarily true.
Like I say, there's a lot of projection here.
Yeah. He does remember to bring her ring and then heads off to Emre, where even before he's able to knock, she opens the door and hands him a picnic basket, and they're off and running. I think it's interesting that he very clearly calls out but how did you know I was here? As much as Kvothe is fey around the edges, I do also think that Denna is fey around the edges.
Oh, absolutely. There's an element of magic to her.
The fey around the edges thing is also part of why I think instinctively Kvothe does not bring up Valorian. If Denna does have experience with the Fae, or if she is somehow Fae herself, then there would be a more personal connection with Valorian and a more personal reason not to bring her up.
Yeah, again, it's like talking about your ex with someone who quite probably has had encounters with them. So when Kvothe sets the destination here, he takes her to a small dell sheltered by the backs of trees, with a stream meandering past a greystone. Greystones are always significant around here, and they seem to feature heavily in Denna and Kvothe's relationship.
I also think that there are more of them near the university, almost as though they're like ley lines of some sort, or the choice to put the university here may have something to do with the connection to the magic that they bring.
That would make sense. Like if a convergence of ley lines charted by greystones led to unusual phenomena in the area, it would make sense for arcanists to set up a place to study them in that area, and then the university grows up around that.
Eventually, possibly loses the thread of why they started here.
Right.
Or it's just for very advanced students.
Right.
Denna wades into the river and then asks Kvothe, "Do you know the secret of stones?" And here I am right at the beginning of this question saying, maybe she does know more about the Greystones. Maybe we're actually going to get some answers about something that has been kind of nagging at us since the beginning of the story. Nope.
She's talking about river stones.
And she's also using it as a ploy to dunk Kvothe in the river.
Although I'm going to say that this little story that she tells here also gives us a hint to her psychology, and I think is pretty useful in explaining her reactions to Kvothe, as we'll see here. So she says, "If you listen close enough, it will tell you a story. Once there was a boy who came to the water. This is the story of a girl who came to the water with the boy. They talked, and the boy threw the stones as if casting them away from himself. The girl didn't have any stones, so the boy gave her some. Then she gave herself to the boy, and he cast her away as he would a stone, unmindful of any falling she might feel." He says, "That's a sad stone," and she says, "It's not sad, but it was thrown once. It knows the feel of motion. It has trouble staying the way most stones do. It takes the offer that the water makes and moves sometimes."
Hint, hint. The story is not about a stone.
Metaphor. My theory here is this is Denna explaining why she is the way she is. She loved someone once and they cast her away. And ever since then, she's had an instinctive reaction to this sort of thing. She's got some rejection sensitivity, I think. So she wants to leave on her terms. And it's easier if she just cuts things short. The pain of being cast away by someone is too much for her to bear. And I think it makes it hard for her to open up to Kvothe in the same way that he has a hard time opening up to her.
And it also might not be a singular love. It might also be a family casting her aside.
It may be part of a larger pattern for her. And the thing about the human brain is that sometimes we see patterns that are there and we recognize them. But oftentimes we also, when there isn't a pattern, make one. And we end up projecting that pattern onto things that are unrelated, and we create self-fulfilling prophecies. I think both Kvothe and Denna have a way of doing that. Like, I look at the scene here, it's two deeply broken people who don't know how to talk about how broken they are, and they don't know how to share that vulnerability with one another. Like, Denna's made a stab here with this story.
She says, "You'd be amazed the things you hear if only you take the time to listen. You never know what you might hear. Try it."
Well, Kvothe is earnestly listening to the stone. and wondering if he should pretend to hear a story and make something up that's cute and sweet. Denna pushes him into the water and starts a splash fight.
So, if their relationship weren't so tortured, I'd think it was cute.
What I'm seeing here is a push-pull between the need to be vulnerable and the need to create distance. I think Denna's actions here make sense from the lens of someone who realizes just how much of herself that she's actually put out there and is terrified of what that could mean, and then comes up with a way to turn it into a joke.
I do love how Kvothe says, thanks to my studies with Eladin, I had a high tolerance for the ridiculous. Like, I think that makes him a little bit blind to the reality and to the deeper meanings. I think he's just seeing the ridiculous. Although he should be able to see past that because that is the thing that happens with Eladin. He's ridiculous on his face and way deeper than anyone gives him any credit for. And the same thing is happening, and Kvothe isn't seeing it, and it's infuriating from the outside.
Right. Like, Denna kind of gave him a roadmap of why she is the way she is, and he steadfastly ignored it.
I'd say that because of his fear of opening up and his projection that no one else would want to, he does not approach this with anything like curiosity.
Well, and then he then decides, well, I'm going to get one up on you, and then he starts telling his story of the wily arcanist, leaning into his power fantasy, and then uses that to, again, escalate the splash fight.
Yeah, what started off with them like trying to keep their clothes above their waist or above their knees kind of dry, no, not at all. That didn't work. It just kind of went the way of the dodo, and like they're trying to dunk each other. They're getting some of their energy out. They should probably just
Fork and
get it done with, but they're not going to, which is just one more frustration for the audience watching.
It's literary edging.
Do we have to censor that?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay, hopefully not. hopefully we don't get in trouble with any of the services that carry things when I don't call it explicit. So there's another little mention of the wind coming up, and like as they get out of the river and are trying to like dry out their clothes in the sun and whatnot, the wind stirred, reminding us of how wet we were. Denna strips away her dress and is just in a shift that doesn't leave anything to Kvothe's imagination. And he takes off his shirt and vest, but he leaves the pants on, I think wisely. He didn't have any other thing to wear. Guess underwear isn't a thing here. And also, her reaction later to seeing him shirtless is fearful. She, for all we know, trusts Kvothe, insofar as I think Denna can trust any man. And yet her initial reaction to seeing him shirtless is, oh my God, he's going to ask me or expect me or make me. We don't know. So this is all very tortured still. No one can relax. It's frustrating. It's painful to watch or to read. There's things like, hey, can you scoot over? He was going to lay down next to her, and then she reacts very poorly, and he just sets the food down next to her instead. There's, hey, I can smell you just standing there. There is a potential, because Denna says, you're about to ask me a question, and the answer is yes. And Kvothe doesn't know the question. He can think of a dozen questions. He's not sure. He's not sure how far he can push that. A kiss? Clearly he wants to kiss her. More than that? Clearly he wants more than that. But he doesn't ask for it.
He's so afraid. Like, in spite of the fact that, she's kissed him on the cheek numerous times throughout this, that she's been playful and flirty and, open with him, he's afraid that if he asks her for what he would actually like, she will tell him no, and being told no is worse than just assuming that the answer is no.
And apparently it's also worse than this tortured back and forth. I'm going to ignore some sentences in it because it kind of made me like gag in my mouth. But after everything has kind of settled, Kvothe starts thinking about how to bring up his desire to protect and save her. He can see that she's got bruising, that she's been hurt physically, and he wants to take away that pain. And he's about to ask, he's about to talk about it, he's about to bring it up, and she looks over and says, "What happened to your back?" And like, he's just over here thinking, hey, I'm finally financially set. I can actually help. I can actually do something about how my friend is in danger, how this person that I have these feelings for is in danger. I can do these things. Now, he's secure enough for himself right now, but I don't think he's set. But her looking over and just disarming him. And he's like, yeah, no big deal. I broke some rules. The university had me whipped. And the casualness is horrifying.
Yeah. And as he's saying this, like as the words leave his mouth, he realizes that, from the outside, Denna probably looks at him the same way he's looking at her.
Why do you go back? Why is this something that is valuable enough for you to put up with the physical pain and degradation?
With the abuse. And he says, well, there's nowhere else that he can learn the things that they teach, which is probably how Denna feels about Master Ash. I think in that moment, he kind of starts to reassess some of the judgments that he's had. Like, oh, Denna can't leave because she's weak or whatever. It's probably not that. It's probably not a thing of weakness. And it's not because she needs someone to protect her. It's because she's made a choice. It's probably not because she sees no other way to be safe. Safety isn't what she's going for. Same way Kvothe isn't at the university for safety, even as it has afforded him some measure of it. And as this silence starts to deepen, Denna notes that Kvothe has built up something of a reputation around Imre as a ladies' man. And Kvothe doesn't really know how to handle this, I don't think.
Not how to respond or use it kind of to flirt. I think that if he could, I don't know, take all of this as an invitation to be free, to be flirty, to be cute, I think it would be a much better result for him, for Denna. If all they're looking for right now is kind of that physical release and that tryst, and then maybe branch that off into, I don't know, actual vulnerability, I think that would work out much better, but that's never happening. So he does approach it with a little bit of curiosity, and he does that, I think, because it's about him. A little self-centered. What do they say exactly? Some think you're trying to decimate Emre's female population. And I was, when I read that, thinking Will is going to have a pedantic reaction to that particular sentence. And then, surprise to literally no one, Pat has a rather pedantic reaction to that one. Decimate would imply 1 in 10, I said, trying to turn it into a joke. That's slightly ambitious, even for me. And then she says, how reassuring. Do you bring all of them? And then she slipped down the side of the stone, cutting herself off, and says something different when he kind of pushes at it. What do you mean? What are you talking? Bring them what? Roses, you fool.
We know her thoughts on roses. She thinks they're cliche.
That's not what this is about, though. She was asking, do you bring all of them here? She's trying to find out if she's one of many.
Right. She doesn't know if she's just another passing dalliance for Kvothe or if she means something more to him. Because clearly, I think she wants to mean something more to someone.
I think she wants to mean something more to Kvothe, not just someone.
I think you're right. She wants to be valued and truly loved and respected and honored.
There is something, especially with this very tortured chapter, there has to be something more to Denna as a person than what we have been given.
I think there is a lot more to her. And she's given us hints, right? Little bits and pieces here and there. But Kvothe is so wrapped up in his own story and trying to be the hero in every situation that he doesn't know how to perceive that. He doesn't know how to study that.
He doesn't even know how to ask about it.
No. He's got some ideas about being able to understand things. He thinks that he should be able to understand everything, and if he can't understand something, he can't truly love them.
The way that you're talking has reminded me of one more thing that really bothers me about how Kvothe even refers to Denna.
Thing.
Thing.
Yeah, I also had issues with that. Like, I think he's got a couple misapprehensions here, and we'll get into them a little bit deeper in the next chapter. But one, he thinks that understanding is a prerequisite for love rather than it being a process that is a part of love. Like, and it is not like there's just this eureka moment where you're like, aha, I understand this person and now I can love them. I'm gonna get poetic here, so you're gonna have to bear with me.
Well, I'm not Kvothe, so I'm good.
So I think love is not about completely understanding another person, but it's looking at a person and grasping the magnitude of how much you don't understand them and having the trust and faith in that other person to spend the time getting to know and understand them better. I don't think that there is enough time in the world to truly and completely understand another human being, but you can always understand them better.
I will also say human beings don't always understand themselves.
Exactly. And if you can't conceive of understanding yourself, and that's a prerequisite for love, you can't love yourself. Like, love is an activity, it's a journey, it's not the destination. And understanding is an activity. You grow to understand a person better day by day, year by year. And I think about us, right? We've been together for, quite a while now. We've been together for about 15 years. And in that time, each successive day, we've grown to understand each other more and more. Like, I understand you better now than I did when we first got together.
I'm also not the same person.
No, we're not static. And each day we're understanding the new version of ourselves that appears before us.
It takes effort. And I think this idea that you have to fully understand a person to be able to love them, I think that's
Bullshit.
because I also think it implies that we don't learn, that we don't grow, that we don't change, that we don't take in information and adjust.
Yeah, I think love is recognizing just how much you don't understand and being okay with it and accepting. And it's a risk. I think when we come down to it, that's the core of Kvothe's problem. He thinks that love exists in certainty when it's anything but. To love is to risk. It's to risk rejection. It's to risk loss. It's to risk finding things that maybe you didn't want to find out about. But that's what love is. It is something that you take a chance on. And sometimes people will encourage you to be cautious with your heart, but it is always a risk, no matter how cautious you are.
I don't think you can ever fully protect yourself from other people's potential. Back to the story. Kvothe asks, "Would you like me to carry you?" And Denna answers yes and is independent and walks herself back to her clothing, regardless. She says, "Yes, I would like you to carry me," and does not let him.
I think this is an example of the stone knowing what it means to be thrown, how it feels to be thrown. And I think she's allowed herself this fantasy for the afternoon. And there's a part of her who is anticipating a rejection, an abandonment. And so she's putting some distance between herself and Kvothe, even now.
She does actually get her hem of her shift wet. And Kvothe is like, "But I could have carried you." Denna pressed the back of her hand to her forehead. "Another 7 words. I swoon." She fanned herself with her other hand. What should a woman do? And while he means it to sound flippant and carefree and flirty, it doesn't come out this way. It doesn't come out as intended. He says, "Love me." And it goes over like a lead balloon.
It's probably the cringiest bit there because it reveals this central wound that Kvothe has been carrying with him since he was a child.
No one loves him, except there are people that love him.
but he doesn't recognize that, and he is forever needing that reassurance. And I think he's being honest here. He does need someone to love him. He does need love, because we all do. There is not a human being alive who does not need love. And at the same time, he's not giving her anything else. All he's giving is just his need. He's not saying, hey, I love you. He's not saying, I care about you. He's saying, I need you to love me. And again, there are things that are true that don't need to be said. Like, it may be true that yes, he does need her to love him, but he really shouldn't be saying it that way. He should also be showing her some love as well. And in that moment, he's not.
And so her response kind of goes through phases. For a fleet second, she held my eyes with intent tenderness, and then a rueful smile quirked up at the corners of her mouth. Oh no, not that trap for me. I'll not be one of the many. And Kvothe is left embarrassed and confused, feeling like he'd made a complete mess of everything, says, I beg your pardon. And she says, you should. She's going through a rapid cycle of emotions, and now she's angry. And she braids as clear as day. Kvothe can read it. Don't speak to me. And he shuts up. Again, I think she might be a shaper. I also combine this learning how to tie commands or glamours into her hair to like the last bit that we're going to talk about. It's a little conspiracy theorist of me. But what is this book if not just conspiracy theory after conspiracy theory after conspiracy theory? And only one person knows the answer. I want to continue talking about this book series, and we've got one more episode after this. Anyway, before the end of their very tortured outing, I don't even want to call it a date, Denna does notice that Kvothe sees the command to not speak to her, takes it out of her hair, blah, 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 all that stuff. Fiddles with her hands, her rings, and it reminds Kvothe, oh yeah, I have something for you. So there was a Christmas that I had no money, and I had some really close friends that I did want to do some nice things for. And one of them had told me that he had lent a series of books that he really liked to someone that was dating a friend of his, and that those two broke up. And now he can't get his books back. So I retrieved his own stuff for him for Christmas. That was my gift to him, was to reach out and ask the person to give me his stuff back. That's what this reminds me of.
A little bit, although, like, when Kvothe says, I got it from Ambrose.
We should be clear. He's giving Denna's ring back to her.
And he says he got it from Ambrose, but that kind of almost makes it sound like he and Ambrose just had a talk.
And not that he stole it while burning his rooms down.
Like, he doesn't go into the elaborate heist or any of that stuff that legit makes for a fun story and probably would have endeared him to her.
Right. I mean, she would probably love that story.
Yeah, she'd think that's cool. She would think that you got one over on that jerk, you know?
Right. Kvothe. Damn it. Mostly, I think maybe he didn't do that. Maybe he didn't talk about it because of her initial reaction, which was, oh God, you're also going to give me crap? Like stuff? I don't need stuff. And he's just like, but I really want to give you your ring back, so here. Ineloquent and...
It's anticlimactic.
Yeah. He goes, I'm sorry it took so long. And she's grateful for it, right? She's not upset with him. But man, Kvothe, she disappears often. You don't know when you're going to be able to talk about the heist. Talk about the heist. It was fun.
Mm-hmm. Returning her ring was probably the one thing that maybe salvaged a scrap of hope.
But at the end, there's still this silence. It's stronger than before, thick enough that you could spread it on your bread and eat it. There are some silences that even words cannot drive away. Denna touched his hand, but didn't hold it. Denna goes, the weather's turning. We should probably head back before it rains. And poetically, as they left, clouds cast their shadows across the field behind them as they went.
Yeah. Like I say, All of these are unforced errors.
Mm-hmm.
Kvothe's greatest enemy is not Ambrose, it's not the Chandrian, it's not Master Hem, it's not whoever he's fallen afoul of in Vintus, it's not Carceret, it is Kvothe.
Yeah. Anyway, next chapter, Tangled. Again, making himself a third wheel with Sim and Fella. Sim asks, how'd yesterday go? And Kvothe kind of tells without telling how bad it went. And legit funny. Would you care for a lady's perspective? Asked Fella. I'd settle for yours.
Jerk.
I know, but like this is legit funny.
Oh, yeah.
This is actually like I like that. Because he's treating Fella not just like an other because she's a woman. She's being treated as a friend.
And she takes it playfully as it is.
I'm just going to say it now so that I don't harp on it too much. I do not like the characterization of Sim being this insecure and kind of incelly.
Yeah, I'm not wild about that either.
That's all I'm going to say on it. I'd really rather he be a little more secure that Fella, I don't know, chose him for one thing, is saying that she doesn't actually have any desire to have someone like Kvothe pursuing her, has not been terribly flattering about how Kvothe treats other women. I also don't love most of this. Because while, yes, okay, women do have agency, women can be very sexual beings, women can have just as much fun dating and having casual relationships or having casual sex as men can. There is no shame. I'm not trying to say like the characterization of like wanting someone to be a little more handsy is inaccurate, but the way that it is talked about is kind of gross.
Yeah. Look, I do appreciate that, maybe someone does want a little more physical contact.
Also, maybe wants to be swept off their feet.
Yeah. I think Fella does offer some pretty solid understandings of where Kvothe's problems are, though.
Mm-hmm.
Kvothe, for all of his intelligence, leaps to the assumption that someone can't actually appreciate who he truly is. So he is not someone who will offer physical contact as a thing because he is afraid that the answer is no. So he just sits patiently all by himself, hoping that someone will make the first move.
And I think that there's something, though, to that social commentary. I think that we have started swinging the pendulum a lot. At the time that this was written, I don't think it was nearly as prevalent as it is now. Maybe that's the right word, or nearly as pronounced as it is now. We have to find a balance that I don't think has been struck of allowing people of every gender agency, allowing for spontaneity, and actually understanding social cues given by people that you are romantically and or sexually interested in.
And what I'm going to say here is Kvothe could say something like, hey, is it all right if I touch you? Is it all right if I do something? And you can say no.
I'd go with like, can I hold your hand? Can
Right.
I do this part? Can I,
Right.
Is it okay if I do this? Are you comfortable if I do that? And honestly, like at a certain point, you don't have to ask for every granular everything, but at least to get an understanding and a comfort level and get the ball rolling, the avalanche going down the hill, so to speak.
Well, and it also gives the other person an invitation.
And agency.
Yes. Consent is sexy. And there are ways that you can incorporate consent that are sexy and encourage the other person to enjoy the fun. And, they could have that. And he can do that, but he doesn't. He just is game planning in his situation where he says, well, if I ask, they'll say no. So I'm just going to skip ahead to the part where I just sit by myself with my hands in my pockets and I don't even give them the opportunity to reject me.
Because he's also not giving them the opportunity to enthusiastically consent.
He doesn't think they will.
I have been in situations where if I game plan out my future, it winds up feeling a lot like that, right? Like, depending on my mindset at the time, depending on my mental health at the time, there have definitely been times where I've refused to try for fear of losing. And I haven't completely gotten over that.
I don't think anybody does.
But I think it's important to recognize that that does happen. I think that's all I really want to talk about that section. I don't have a whole lot more unless you have something.
So the one thing that I think Fella ascertains pretty astutely here, though, is that while Kvothe can be mysterious and charming and interesting, there's a part of himself that he keeps at a noticeable remove. There is a part of himself that he won't let anybody touch. And it's a part of himself that drives him in ways that he won't let anybody else into. And so she says, the reason that I don't want to be with you, and I never will, is because I know that no matter how charming and fun and kind and sweet you are, you will leave me. It won't be for malice, but there is a part of you that when that comes calling, you're going to answer that call. And it's that mad quest to avenge his parents. It's what drove him to Ventus. It's what drove him halfway across the world. It's what drove him to the Cathay. All of that has been driving him inexorably for his entire life here. And as much as he may love someone or think he loves someone, he will never love them more than he needs to fulfill this quest that he's given himself. And he's never going to share that load with anybody. He's never going to let his romantic partner also be a partner on that quest. It's his and his alone, not by necessity, but by his own choices. And so what that means is that anyone who is looking to him to be anything more than a passing distraction, as a momentary fling, as a roll in the hay, is in for disappointment, is in for heartbreak. Because like it's the thing that he can't even bring himself to say out loud in his quietest moments by himself. And if he can't even do that, if he can't even allow himself to just be honest with who he is, how can he even possibly share that with another person? How can he share his life with another person? And I think that's a really pointed critique of who he is as a person that really does bear minding. It does bear examination. The secrets that he keeps within his own heart, locked away. Like I said earlier, love is not about understanding, but being open to learning and growing. He's not even able to do that with himself. He keeps that part of himself locked away tight, sealed against even his own thoughts. He won't even let himself grow to understand himself. And that's a part of him that he won't let Denna have, he wouldn't let Fella have, wouldn't even let Felurian have, or anybody else. So if someone wants to have a serious relationship with him, well, that's just not in the cards, not the way he's currently wired. So that's what I wanted to say about that section.
Very fair. I do want to move on to the Elodin section.
Yes.
Kvothe is still feeling out of sorts. He went looking for Master Elodin, and eventually found him sitting under a tree in a small garden next to Muse. Elodin, always enchanting. And he offers Kvothe some grapes. I kind of headcanon this to be like those Japanese grapes that are exceedingly rare and exceedingly expensive, like the cotton candy grapes almost, or whatever they're known as. I don't remember.
I don't remember either.
But they're apparently very, very good and insanely difficult to get a hold of. And this is heartbreaking in how mundane it seems. Fresh fruit wasn't a rarity for me these days. Ouch. And Kvothe asks, what would you think of someone who kept changing their own name? And I think this probably actually strikes a chord of truth, even as we are led to believe that it's a bit hyperbolic and not exactly presented as it sounds.
I do love that Elodin's reaction is, oh no, what have you done?
Yeah. Kvothe, what did you do? No, not me. Okay, wait. What is happening? Who would change their own name? Don't you dare change your own name. That is a bad idea. Do not rename yourself in a way that is like name with a capital N name. And I don't know if that is what Den is doing.
Kvothe doesn't know either, but he mentions, "Oh, well, every time I see her, she's going by a different name," and then Eldon goes, "Oh, you mean her calling name?"
As a person who did change their name, I don't know. I don't know if I love this or don't love this, but I want to take it as in like the capital N name, magical association name, not what do we refer to you as.
I think here in this case, that distinction between your true name and your calling name makes sense. Like a true name is something that isn't given to you, it's something that is discovered and it's something that you find for yourself, whereas a calling name may be something that appears on an invitation or your mail or something like that, but it doesn't necessarily speak to a deeper truth. And I think, like, if we look at like the case of your given, like a given dead name or something like that versus your true name, I think your true name is closer to the one that you've given yourself, because it's a representation of the core you and not just what was put on your birth certificate. Like, I think that's kind of where Eladin is at there.
He answers Kvothe literally, saying it could indicate she doesn't know who she is. It could mean that she does know and doesn't like it. It could indicate restlessness or dissatisfaction. It could mean her nature is changeable and she shifts her name to fit it. Or it could mean that she changes her name with the hope that it might help her be a different person. And Kvothe is just like, that doesn't mean anything. If you don't have an answer for me, just tell me you don't have an answer. And Eladin is just like, but you asked me what I would say of such a girl. You didn't ask me what I actually think is going on, or if I knew someone like this. You asked me what I would think.
Or what I would say. And I think it's also fair to point out that in this scenario, Eldon knows that he doesn't have enough information to make an accurate assessment.
You asked me what I would say of such a girl.
It's the equivalent of having a runny nose and deciding to go to WebMD to diagnose yourself. Off of that one runny nose, right? It could be this, or could be this, or could be this, or could be this, or could be this.
Or it could be cancer.
Right. Up to and including death.
You could be dead.
Right. Like, there isn't enough there to go on. And so Eldon is saying, look, these are all possibilities. I don't know enough to make a distinction.
So Kvothe changes the subject and says, I called the wind again when I was down in Tarbean, and explains how he used it to restore Denna's breath. And Eladin is impressed. That's 3 times this term. How long do you think it will be before you have a ring of air? And Kvothe leaves us on how do you know I don't, and leaves Eladin on how do you know I don't. The next chapter, chapter 150, conspiracy theorist time. Okay, so one of Kvothe's fears was that Denna was going to come to Emre to sing her song that Kvothe is certain is inaccurate and wrong, and that she's going to embarrass herself, that she's going to spread misinformation, when all he's got to go on is something he heard from a storyteller when he was a kid starving in Tarbean. And he has no reason to trust Scarpy or Scarpy's telling of this story over Denna or her patrons.
I've got another theory.
Yeah.
I think that he may not be afraid of that per se, so much as that she will inadvertently summon the Chandrian. And
possibly. That might be a fear.
I think it's his deepest fear.
I don't know that that's the motivation right now, but I don't know that you're wrong either.
I think it can be 2 things, but I think it is at least a very large, perhaps underlying one that he can't bring to acknowledge.
Well, anyway, she doesn't do the thing that he's afraid of. Instead, she moves on, goes up to Annalyn, which is the place that she was going when they met. And then they actually parted ways in a way. She informed him this time.
Yeah, no missed letters this time.
No, I guess I'll see you when I see you. I'm going to leave and never tell you. And Kvothe takes this as a good sign, as a step in the right direction. And I don't know what to think on that. I don't know if that's true or not, but good on you. Cool. You can be flattered all you want. The part of this that is like, Master Herma fell ill just as the term was coming to a close. It cuts Kvothe's Yillish classes short. it stops him from being able to learn more about that art, that thing that Denna uses, and is embarrassed or wary about him knowing what she's tying in her hair.
It also means that he can't continue his work trying to understand the lackless box.
Could be knots engraved in that. It could be music engraved in there. It could be all sorts of things. Regardless, as Herma continues to be sick and incapacitated, a new chancellor does need to be appointed, and they chose him.
Well, they've run through it where Kilvin, Arwyll, and Lauren are too busy with their duties to take up extra work, and Mandrag and Dahl are also pretty busy, though perhaps to a lesser extent, which leaves Eladin, Brander, and Hem. Eladin doesn't want it, and let's be real, he'd probably be terrible at it anyway.
Yeah, he's generally regarded as too erratic to serve.
And I think he's also smart enough to know that administrative work is wasted on him.
Yeah.
So that leaves Brander and Hem, and Brander is basically Hem's lackey anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So naturally, it's in the hands of the worst. No parallel to real life here.
I am sure that everyone can figure out our politics without us having to say it. And that's where I'm leaving that. So next semester starts with admissions, and Kvothe is trying his best not to get on the bad side of the rules or the customs within the university, because he also understands that at this point, skating on thin ice. So he does bad enough where he ought to get a mildly bad tuition, right? Like something that isn't embarrassingly high, but also is not good. And instead, his tuition winds up being 50 talents.
Which, given the unique arrangement that Kvothe has worked out with the bursar,
means that Kvothe just got rich, baby.
Don't threaten him with a good time.
And he uses that extra funding to treat his friends to like expensive dinner where they all can kind of laugh about Hem's folly. That's an interesting last word. That is an interesting chapter name. I don't think that the sword being referred to as folly is subtle.
I think folly cuts both ways. We know that Hem is not above weaponizing institutions to get what he wants. And if he discovers the unique arrangement that Kvothe has right now as far as funding goes, he doesn't have to make the same mistake twice. Let's say he decides that, oh, hey, you get a full ride. You don't have to pay any tuition. You're so brilliant. Well, now suddenly Kvothe loses an income stream if that happens. And then he's having to do a lot more work at the fishery.
What if, oh, do this amount of work for the fishery to make sure that you have enough tuition, and then all of his money goes from the fishery directly to pay for his tuition, anything that he would have earned.
There are all kinds of ways that Kvothe could still be taken advantage of. And so while it is good that he is perhaps enjoying his friends while he can,
also his financial freedom while he can,
it's by no means assured.
Yes, but I'm talking about like the meta narrative outside. I'm talking about how the sword in the Waystone, the one on the bracket on the placard, is named Folly, and how it is not Sisera.
There are hard times ahead for Kvothe.
Right. We've seen them. We will continue to see them. In fact, we will see them next time.
So with that, why don't we move on to our Phronimos? So it's my turn this week. And I think of all of the people that Kvothe interacts with, our best bet for Phronimos is going to have to be Fela. She's able to offer him some much needed perspective on how he actually looks to outsiders. She's actually telling him how other people see him, not just how he sees himself or how the stories see him. Like, she's talking about, this is how people view Kvothe, the person, not Kvothe the Bloodless or Kvothe the Arcane or any of these other heroic figures that have sprung up with the same name. And she points out that while Kvothe has many good points, the things that she finds attractive are oftentimes the same source of his weak points. His charmingness, his courtesy, is also something that he uses to keep himself at a distance.
It's also hesitant.
Right. She also points out that Kvothe hasn't done a very good job of thinking about how his actions affect the way people perceive him, and thus it makes it easier for people to take a less than charitable view towards his personality. Because he keeps his distance, it feels like no matter who Kvothe is with, because of his distance, there's always going to be a higher priority in his life that will eventually take him away from whoever his partner is. The heart of the matter is that secret quest to defeat the Chandrian is always going to drive a wedge between Kvothe and any other prospective partner. He can't share that quest, like I said earlier, and Fella is pretty able to see the shape of that. She doesn't know everything that fills that void, but she knows it's there. She knows that there's something that Kvothe cannot share with the world around him, with the people that he cares about, because he can't let them get close. And he can't even share it with himself half the time. So I think that's a pretty astute judge of who Kvothe is as a person, and it's a perspective he's been lacking for a long time now. So yeah, that's why Fella is our Phronimos. She gives a very accurate, while at the same time kind, assessment. She isn't saying any of this stuff to be mean. She's saying this is stuff you need to know, stuff you need to figure out. It may be difficult. It may not be the thing you wanted to hear, but that's what happened. All right, I think it's time for Thing of the Week. It's your turn. What'd you pick?
My recommendation is very influenced by current events, but I think it's a good thing regardless of the timing. Curate your media consumption, especially your news consumption. Right now, I am very tempted to consume everybody's take on the aftermath of the US presidential election. As a non-binary person, as a person with the reproductive parts that could potentially carry a pregnancy, as someone with a lot of friends in the queer community, as a person with a lot of friends who are women or otherwise affected by reproductive health care, as someone who has a lot of people in their life with health concerns beyond that, as a person with rights concerns beyond that, as a person with friends and family with rights concerns beyond that. It is very tempting to flood my system with every single bit of overlapping the same information news. And if I do that, it will do no good. It will just burn me out. And so it is my challenge right now to curate, to be choosy, to seek out accurate and not sensationalized news. I have to stay informed, but I do not have to paralyze myself by filling every moment of every day with it.
I think it's also worth pointing out that it can be very easy to overload and fall into despair.
Yes.
And so it's important to find outlets that give you a realistic assessment of what's happening and then also provide avenues of action to deal with it. It's very easy to point to what's going on and say, oh, this is absolutely terrible, and there's nothing to do about it, and all you can do is scream impotently into the void. And that does not make anything better for anyone. It's better to find things that help you to channel the anger and frustration and fear into something constructive, because we're going to need every ounce of constructive energy that we have. And it's, I think, looking for those ways to be the help, right? To paraphrase the Mr. Rogers quote.
To be the helper.
To be the helper. That's our job. And looking for ways that we can help our friends, our families, our communities at that local level. That's what's going to help us get through all of this.
But first and foremost, what this looks like is different for every person. For me, it's not having every late night comedian and every progressive news source and every former Republican now turned centrist news source or what have you. Not have every podcast, not have everything in my feed, in my purview, in my presence at all times. Because once you do that, when you inundate yourself so much with that one thing, that hyper focus on current event scary, you can also kill your spark for everything else that could possibly get you through it. that could bring you joy, that could bring you solace. If I spend every waking moment that isn't editing the podcast or reading or doing something for it, it's not a ton of my time. I lose my time for playing games that could help reorder my disordered brain, or from learning more about music or playing music or drawing or creating. And it just fills me with worry and hurt. I need to have information, but I do not need to be paralyzed by it. And so curating, choosing one news source, because all of the news sources that I have been following through the election give me the same information, right? Like maybe in different ways, but they weren't wholly unique sources of news. They weren't giving me each different things. They were all telling me about the same events, but the way that they were telling may have had different lenses. And so instead, like, I need to pare it down to like a podcast, preferably one that doesn't update every day. I need to cut it down from every single late night comedian to maybe watching like Seth Meyers and The Daily Show and not all of the rest of them. I need people who are reputable and give accurate information, even if they are joking, to try to help us through with laughter, with humor, because the options are to laugh or to cry.
I would also counsel throughout all of that, look for the things that make surviving worth it. Look for the things that do provide some actual joy on top of all of that.
Yes. Again, why I think it's important to be creative. Creation doesn't have to look like arts and crafts. For me, creativity, expression looks like playing music. It looks like playing games. It looks like creating and cultivating friendships and relationships. It looks like drawing and painting. It looks like making Lego creations. It looks like listening to albums, to sitting quietly with our cat while he prevents me from getting up to go get lunch.
That's never happened.
No. It looks like supporting other people in their creative endeavors. It looks like helping friends who are in need. It may look like volunteering at a local LGBTQ center. It may look like volunteering for political causes or for social causes. I don't know yet. But it can't look like sitting on my couch watching yet another podcast explain to me the thing that I've already heard from 5 different sources and I'm already afraid of the consequences of. It can't just be inaction and fear and sorrow and grief.
I think that's a good recommendation.
Thank you.
So let's move on to 7 words. Well, we had kind of a doozy here. We had both a Denna chapter and an Eladin chapter, so...
It took you how long to find something that you wanted? And how long is... Oh my goodness, you are not reading all of those.
No, I'm not.
I'm looking at Will's list of all the things that he found that he bothered to write down. I'm sure there are more.
Oh, almost certainly.
That he didn't write down. Pick 5 that you want to read to us.
Pardon me while I pare some stuff down here. All right. So I've got, I never said I was in love. I have, but a girl wants more than that. I have, I'll not be one of the many. I have, you're about to ask me a question. I think the final one is, you never know what you might hear.
I think all of those are really good.
I think, though, that last one reminds us about possibilities. So you have words from life. What did you pick?
Well, fair warning, guys and gals and non-binary pals. We're getting really close. And by really close, I mean 1 more episode's worth of this book. Now, the 2 of us need to kind of have a discussion on whether we're going to do a kind of retrospective on all the book information, like all of the stuff that we know, kind of looking at it from a very zoomed out perspective. And I would like to, I just don't know that we're going to. But we have 1 more one more in this book. We're not stopping the podcast. I have too much fun doing this. And also, not for nothing, but it is the reason that I read.
We've got our summer reading program coming up in January.
Yes. Depending on timing, we might just take a break after. I'd have to look. We might take a break till the beginning of January, till the first Tuesday of January, just so that we have some time off. We kind of haven't taken much time off, not really, from the podcast since we started it. And this seems like it would potentially be a decent time to have a very short break for us, with a promise of Legends and Lattes coming up starting in January. I think that sounds like a really good idea.
Agreed.
My 7 words are, I can't believe this book's almost over. It's been such a big part. It will have been 75 episodes, specifically on the Wise Man's Fear. Also, don't quote me on January being the very beginning of the summer reading program if we do decide to do a retrospective. I don't know what our timing's going to be like. It's an idea.
The beginning of 2025.
Somewhere in there. But we're probably going to give ourselves a little bit of a break. But we will be back with with multiple new books as time goes by. If you have ideas of what you'd like us to read, please come over to our Discord and just drop us a suggestion.
Open to conversation.
Absolutely. On one hand, I'm happy to end this chapter of the podcast. And on the other, it just feels so weird. Because our idea also, just so that everyone knows, we're going to keep up with a part of the theming about the fact that this is conceived as a Name of the Wind and the Wise Man's Fear Kingkiller Chronicle theme podcast. We're going to be breaking any books that we read up into 7 parts. So there'll be little mini-series until or unless or whatever Doors of Stone is released. And then we'll go back to talking about this world.
Well, with that, I'd like to thank you for potting with me.
Thank you for potting with me.
And thanks for listening to Tales from the Waystone.
For 74 episodes so far. Dang. Join us next time on Tales from the Waystone as we discuss chapters 151 through the epilogue of the book, through the lens of cliffhangers. We would like to thank our friend Shawnee Jang for our theme music.
And many thanks to Patrick Rothfuss for creating a world that we've enjoyed exploring.
Audio production, editing, and social media coordination, such as it is, by the way, I did close off our Twitter, courtesy of me, Phoenix McCullough.
Writing and project management, courtesy of me, Will McCullough.
If you would like to help support us and have the means to do so, please consider becoming a patron on our Patreon page, patreon.com/waystonepod. And with that, here's to one more day above the roses.
To one more day above the roses.
Ding! It's almost time for Light the Lamp, Not the Rat. Light the Lamp, Not the Rat.
Light the lamp, not the rat. Yeah, we're getting close.
Yeah.
And by the time this one comes out, it'll be appropriate.
We can watch it.
Yes, as can our audience.